I never imagined that the man who promised to love me forever would betray me in my own home with my cousin. I gave everything to Alejandro, my heart, my trust, my wealth. But it wasn't enough. While I paid his mother Carmela $6,000 every month, for her endless needs, they plotted behind my back. The night of our engagement party, when Carmela demanded an extra $5,000 for a fake emergency, I finally stood up to her. Her response? She slapped me across the face, sending me stumbling into the hallway where I caught Alejandro with his hands all over my cousin Priya. His mother didn't even try to hide her true feelings anymore. "Get out," she hissed at me in my own house. They thought they had broken me. They thought wrong. What they didn't know was that I would be reborn from this betrayal, and prison bars were waiting for them both. The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine and sea salt through the open windows of my villa as I moved between guests, refilling glasses and making sure everyone was comfortable. My golden silk sari caught the light as I turned, and I noticed several admiring glances from the guests. The dinner party was going perfectly, exactly as I had planned it. "You've outdone yourself again, Nisha," remarked Mrs. Patel, an elderly family friend who had known my grandmother. "She would be so proud to see you now, in this beautiful home, with such a handsome fiancé." I smiled, touching the ruby ring on my finger, my grandmother's final gift to me before she passed. "Thank you. I hope she would be." From across the room, Alejandro caught my eye and raised his glass in a subtle toast. Tall, with olive skin and a smile that had once made my heart race, he looked perfectly at ease among my friends and extended family. To anyone watching, we were the ideal couple, the successful businessman and the wealthy heiress, planning our perfect wedding in our Mediterranean dream home. Only I noticed how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes when he thought no one was looking. How his hand on my waist felt possessive rather than loving. But I pushed those thoughts away. Wedding stress, I told myself. Cultural differences. Nothing that time and understanding couldn't fix. As the last guests departed around midnight, Alejandro's phone rang. He stepped into the hallway to answer, his voice dropping to a whisper. When he returned, his expression was tense. "Mother's apartment building had a major flood," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The whole place needs renovation. She needs somewhere to stay." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I had met Carmela only 3 times before our engagement, and each encounter had left me feeling subtly judged and found wanting. "For how long?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Just temporarily," Alejandro assured me, his charm returning, full force as he took my hands in his. "She has nowhere else to go, mi amor. She's family now." Family. The word that always silenced my objections. In my culture, family was sacred. You didn't turn away family in need. I nodded, ignoring the voice inside that whispered this was a mistake. Carmela arrived at 3 in the morning with 6 matching designer suitcases and a smile that didn't disguise the calculating look in her eyes as she surveyed my home. "Such a quaint place," she commented, running a manicured finger along the antique Indian sculpture in the entryway. "We'll make it livable, I suppose." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that she was tired, displaced. "I've prepared the guest suite for you," I said, leading her upstairs. "It has its own bathroom and a small sitting area." She peered into the room with barely concealed disappointment. Alejandro said the house was quite grand. "It's nearly 3,000 square feet," I replied, trying to keep my voice even, "with an ocean view." Was her only response as she waved me away. "I'll need help with my bags, and tea before bed, with honey and lemon." That night, as Alejandro slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to quiet my unease. "It's just temporary," I reminded myself. "Just until her apartment is repaired." I couldn't have known then that temporary would stretch into weeks, and weeks into months. that my peaceful home would become a battlefield of small aggressions and growing resentments, that my bank accounts would be drained by $6,000 every month to fund Carmela's necessities, her weekly spa treatments, her designer shopping habits, her expensive taste in wines. The first time I questioned an expense, a $1,200 hair treatment that Carmela had charged to my personal account, Alejandro's charming facade cracked. "She's family," he said, his voice suddenly cold in a way I had never heard before. "We take care of family? Or is that not how things work in your culture?" The subtle dig stung, but I backed down, not wanting to create conflict. After all, I had more than enough money from my inheritance. If this kept peace in our home until the wedding, perhaps it was worth it. But peace never came. Instead, the atmosphere grew increasingly toxic. Carmela, accidentally, broke my grandmother's vase, replaced my traditional spices with bland alternatives, and constantly made comments that cut deep. "Is that what people wear in your country?" she would ask when I dressed in traditional clothing. "No wonder you can't cook properly. You weren't raised in a real family," she would remark when I prepared dinner. Each time, Alejandro sided with his mother, leaving me increasingly isolated in my own home. I began to notice other troubling patterns too: Alejandro's unexplained absences, hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room, jewelry that went missing from my dressing table. My cousin Priya began visiting frequently, offering seemingly genuine support and sisterly advice. "Don't take it personally," she would say after particularly cutting remarks from Carmela. "Some people just take time to warm up." I was grateful for her presence, even as I noticed how much time she spent alone with Alejandro, discussing wedding plans that somehow never included me. As I prepared for our engagement party, spending weeks organizing a celebration that would honor both our cultures, I tried to ignore the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. The sideways glances between Alejandro and Priya, the mysterious withdrawals from my accounts, the way Carmela spoke about after the wedding, with a gleam in her eye that made me shiver. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of planning a cross-cultural wedding while managing Carmela's constant demands was making me see problems where none existed. That once we were married, things would improve. The engagement party was set for Saturday evening. Guests would arrive. At 7, everything was prepared, from the fusion menu to the traditional music playlist. I had even hired staff to serve so that I could focus on being the perfect hostess. As I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my grandmother's ruby necklace to match her ring, I forced a smile. Tonight would be perfect. Tonight would remind me why I had fallen in love with Alejandro. Tonight would be the beginning of our future together. I couldn't have known it would instead reveal the elaborate lie I had been living, or that by morning, my world would be shattered beyond recognition. The transformation of my home happened so gradually that I almost didn't notice it. One morning, I woke to find Carmela had rearranged the living room, replacing my handcrafted pillows with her own garish designs. When I mentioned it to Alejandro, he seemed surprised by my objection. "She's just trying to make herself comfortable," he said, reaching for his phone rather than looking at me. "It's only furniture, Nisha." But it wasn't only furniture. It was a systematic erasure of my presence in my own home. My spice rack, carefully organized with fragrant blends passed down through generations, was emptied and replaced with pre-packaged seasoning mixes. My grandmother's photographs were moved from the mantel to a drawer. My books were relegated to the spare bedroom to make space for Carmela's collection of ceramic figurines. I tried to be understanding. After all, she was displaced from her home, though the renovations on her apartment seemed to be taking an extraordinarily long time. Whenever I asked about progress, the answer was always vague: complications with permits, supply chain issues, contractor delays. It wasn't until I checked my credit card statement that I realized the true extent of my generosity. In the 3 months since Carmela had moved in, I had spent over $18,000 on her necessities. Spa treatments twice weekly, shopping trips to exclusive boutiques, first-class tickets for a weekend trip to visit her sister, and always, the finest wines and foods that my money could buy. When I finally gathered the courage to discuss financial boundaries, Alejandro's reaction shocked me. "You're being petty," he said, voice eerily calm. "You have more money than you could spend in a lifetime. Mother has specific needs due to her health conditions." "What health conditions?" I asked, genuinely confused. Carmela seemed perfectly robust when organizing dinner parties or spending 8 hours at the mall. "The fact that you would even ask that shows how little you care about her well-being," he snapped, turning away. "She's family. We take care of family." That phrase again, the one he knew would silence me. In my culture, family was sacred. You didn't count pennies when it came to family. But something about this felt wrong, exploitative in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Later that week, I noticed $3,000 missing from my checking account. The withdrawal had been made at an ATM I never used across town. When I mentioned it to Alejandro, he seemed unconcerned. "I needed cash for the caterer deposit," he said, though we had no events planned that required catering. "I meant to tell you." That night, I lay awake listening to him speaking in hushed tones on the phone in the bathroom, too quiet for me to make out the words. When he returned to bed, I pretended to be asleep, my mind racing with questions I was too afraid to ask. Priya visited more frequently as tension in the house grew. My cousin had always been the opposite of me, outgoing where I was reserved, modern where I respected tradition. Initially, her visits were a welcome respite from the increasingly strained atmosphere at home. She would bring chai from my favorite shop and listen sympathetically to my carefully worded concerns about living with Carmela. "Family dynamics are always complicated," she would say, patting my hand. "Especially when cultures mix. You're doing the right thing by being patient." But I began to notice how her visits often coincided with Alejandro's rare days off, how they would disappear together to discuss wedding plans or pick up lunch. Once I overheard them laughing in the garden, their heads close together, conversation, stopping abruptly when I approached. "Just telling him about our childhood," Priya explained with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "All the trouble you used to get us into." I couldn't remember ever getting Priya into trouble. If anything, it had always been the reverse. Strange things began happening around the house. My jewelry would go missing, only to reappear in different locations. Important documents were misplaced. Once I found my passport in the kitchen junk drawer, though I distinctly remembered locking it in my desk. "You're becoming forgetful," Carmela remarked when I mentioned these occurrences. "Perhaps the stress of planning such an elaborate wedding is too much for you." The stress was indeed mounting, but not because of the wedding. I felt increasingly like a stranger in my own home, unwelcome and unnecessary, except as a source of funding. When I suggested scaling back the wedding plans to something more intimate, both Alejandro and Carmela reacted with unusual vehemence. "We've already sent the invitations," Alejandro insisted. "We can't embarrass ourselves by changing plans now." "Besides," Carmela added with a smile that didn't warm her eyes, "your grandmother would have wanted you to have the wedding of the century. It's the least you can do to honor her memory." The mention of my grandmother felt like a slap. She had been a practical, unassuming woman who valued sincerity over spectacle. The lavish wedding Carmela was orchestrating, with its imported flowers and custom crystal centerpieces, would have horrified her. But I remained silent, doubtful of my own instincts. Perhaps I was being unreasonable. Perhaps this was simply what joining a new family entailed, this gradual surrender of self, space, and resources. One evening, I returned early from a meeting, with the wedding planner to find Alejandro in my home office, rifling through my desk drawers. "What are you doing?" I asked, startling him. "Looking for stamps," he replied smoothly, though I kept stamps in the kitchen drawer, not my office. "Mother needs to mail some thank you notes." That night, I made a decision. I contacted my bank and requested text alerts for any withdrawal or charge over $100. I installed a small safe in the back of my closet for my most valuable jewelry and important documents. Small acts of self-protection that filled me with both relief and shame. What kind of relationship required such precautions? As the engagement party approached, the demands intensified. Carmela insisted on a guest list almost double what we had planned, including people neither Alejandro nor I had ever met. The menu was changed 3 times, each iteration more expensive than the last. My suggestion to incorporate traditional Indian dishes was dismissed as too exotic for most guests. I spent the week before the party in a haze of arrangements and compromises, trying to salvage some element of my original vision while keeping peace. The morning of the event, Carmela presented me with a bill for the flowers, nearly $4,000 for arrangements I hadn't approved. "Sign here," she said, sliding her credit card statement across the counter. They wouldn't take my card without verification. I signed, too exhausted to argue, watching as she tucked the paper into her purse with a satisfied smile. Hours later, as I dressed for the party in a sari that had been altered to Carmela's specifications, less traditional, more revealing, I barely recognized my reflection. The woman staring back at me looked defeated, diminished somehow. I touched my grandmother's ruby ring, the one possession that still felt wholly mine, and tried to recapture some sense of my former self. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of love and union. Why did it feel like I was preparing for battle? The engagement party began with an artificial perfection that made my skin crawl. Carmela stood at the door alongside Alejandro, greeting guests as if this were her home, her celebration. I remained slightly behind them, accepting congratulations with a smile that felt frozen on my face. Several relatives commented on how different I looked, their eyes lingering on my altered sari, the heavy makeup Carmela had insisted upon. "You seem tired, Beta," my aunt whispered as she embraced me. "Is everything all right?" I assured her it was just wedding stress, the same explanation I had been giving myself for months. But as the evening progressed, I found it increasingly difficult to maintain the facade. Carmela moved through the party like a queen, accepting compliments on the decorations I had spent weeks planning, taking credit for the fusion menu I had carefully crafted with the caterer. When my father's oldest friend raised a toast to my grandmother's memory, Carmela smoothly intercepted the conversation. "Such a generous woman," she said, though she had never met my grandmother. "She would be so pleased to see how we've improved the place since Nisha inherited it." I bit my tongue, remembering that this was supposed to be a celebration. From across the room, I caught Priya watching me, her expression unreadable. She wore a dress I had never seen before, something expensive and striking that seemed at odds with her usual casual style. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away, moving toward the bar where Alejandro was pouring drinks. As the evening wore on, I found myself retreating to the kitchen, ostensibly to check on the catering staff, but really to catch my breath away from the suffocating atmosphere in the main rooms. I was inspecting the dessert trays when Carmela entered, closing the door behind her. "There you are," she said, her voice sharp despite her smile. "Your absence is being noticed. It's rude to hide from your own guests." "I was just making sure everything is ready for dessert," I explained, straightening a row of mango kulfi that didn't need straightening. "Always the perfectionist," she said with a thin smile. She set her empty wine glass on the counter with a deliberate click. "I need $5,000 by tomorrow morning." The abruptness of the demand caught me off guard. "What? $5,000? She repeated slowly, as if I were a child. "I have expenses that can't wait." "What kind of expenses?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. 6,000 monthly had somehow become normal, but this additional demand felt like the last straw. We agreed on a budget for the month. Her smile disappeared. Are you questioning me? After everything I've done to make this engagement party a success? I just want to know what it's for, I said, hating how my voice had begun to shake. That's a significant amount of money. It's a family emergency, she snapped. Not that you would understand what that means. In real families, we don't count pennies when someone is in need. The familiar manipulation made something shift inside me. I've provided everything you've asked for, I said, finding my voice. I've welcomed you into my home, funded your lifestyle, tolerated your constant criticism. I think I deserve to know what this money is for. Carmela's face transformed, the polite mask slipping to reveal something cold and contemptuous. You think you belong in this family? My son deserves better than some foreign girl playing house with her dead grandmother's money. The naked hatred in her voice stunned me. This is my home, I said, the realization of how much I had compromised myself suddenly crystal clear. And my money. I've been more than generous. Generous? She laughed, a harsh sound without humor. You owe us everything. Without Alejandro, you'd be nothing but a lonely immigrant with more money than sense. At least this way, your wealth is being put to proper use. Get out, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth after months of accommodation. Get out of my kitchen. Get out of my house. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. You ungrateful little witch. In one swift movement, she stepped forward and slapped me hard across the face. The blow caught me completely off guard. I stumbled, backward, knocking into a tray of glasses that crashed to the floor. My cheek burned, and I tasted blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. The kitchen door burst open at the commotion, and a server stared in shock at the scene before, quickly retreating. Tears of pain and humiliation blurred my vision as I pushed past Carmela into the hallway. I needed air, needed to escape the suddenly claustrophobic house. But as I turned toward the back garden, I froze. There, in the dimly lit corridor, partially, hidden by a decorative screen, stood Alejandro and Priya. His hands were sliding under her dress, their lips locked in a passionate embrace that spoke of long familiarity. Neither had noticed me yet, too engrossed in each other. I must have made some sound, because suddenly they broke apart, Alejandro's head turning toward me with an expression of annoyance rather than guilt or shame. Nisha, he said, not bothering to step away from Priya. You're interrupting. The bizarre casualness of his response made me wonder if I was dreaming. Interrupting, I repeated, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. In my own home? At our engagement party? Priya at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, smoothing her dress with shaking hands. But Alejandro merely sighed, as if dealing with a tiresome child. This is hardly the time or place for a scene, he said, glancing back toward the main room where guests were still mingling. When would be a better time? I asked, amazed at how calm I sounded despite the roaring in my ears. After the wedding? After you've drained every penny from my accounts? Carmela appeared behind me, her hand gripping my arm. You weren't supposed to see that, she hissed. Her nails dug into my skin. Not yet. The not yet chilled me more than anything else, suggesting a timetable, a plan I had unwittingly disrupted. Let go of me, I said, pulling my arm free. All of you get out of my house. Don't be ridiculous, Carmela said, her public face reasserting itself as a group of guests approached. She smiled and waved them toward the dining room. Dessert is just being served. When they had passed, her expression hardened again. Get yourself together. Go upstairs, fix your makeup, and rejoin the party. We'll discuss this later. There's nothing to discuss, I said, my voice gaining strength. With each word, I want you out. All of you." Alejandro finally stepped away from Priya, his face darkening. "You're overreacting. It was just a kiss." "Just a kiss?" I laughed, the sound foreign to my own ears. "While wearing the engagement ring I paid for? At the party I funded? In the house you've been systematically looting for months?" "Watch your mouth," he snapped, his handsome face contorting with anger. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I think I do," I replied, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "Thieves, con artists, users." Carmela stepped between us, her face a mask of cold fury. "Get out," she said, echoing my own words. "This house may be in your name, but we're family. You're just an outsider." "It's my house," I repeated. But the three of them had formed a united front, physically blocking me from the main areas of my own home, my party, my life. "Not for long," Alejandro said softly, the threat unmistakable in his voice. "You think anyone will believe you over us? The hysterical foreign woman who attacked her future mother-in-law? Who drove her fiancé away with her jealousy and paranoia?" The calculation in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a momentary weakness or a relationship gone wrong. This was predation, pure and simple. And I had been the perfect prey, isolated and trusting. I backed away, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was. My phone was in my purse in the bedroom upstairs. My car keys were in the bowl by the front door, surrounded by guests. I was trapped in my own home with people who had been plotting against me for months. "I'm leaving," I said, more to myself than to them. "I'll stay with my aunt tonight." None of them tried to stop me as I pushed past them and climbed the stairs to my bedroom. With shaking hands, I threw essential items into an overnight bag. Passport, some clothes, my remaining jewelry, financial documents. The ruby ring caught the light as I reached for my purse, reminding me of my grandmother's strength, her resilience in the face of betrayal and loss. I slipped out through the back garden, avoiding the party still in full swing in my home. As I started my car, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror, tears streaking my makeup, a red mark blooming on my cheek, eyes wide with shock and pain. But beneath the hurt, something else was emerging. Determination, clarity, rage. I drove through the winding coastal roads on autopilot, my mind still struggling to process what had just happened. The slap, Alejandro and Priya, the cold calculation in their eyes. By the time I reached my aunt's house, it was nearly midnight, and my hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. Aunt Mira opened the door in her nightgown, her eyes widening, at the sight of me. "Nisha, what on earth?" "I need a place to stay," I managed, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Just for tonight." She ushered me inside without questions, making tea while I sat at her kitchen table, staring at nothing. When she placed a steaming cup in front of me and gently touched my swollen cheek, the tears finally came, hot and bitter. "They played me," I said between sobs. "All of them. For months." My aunt listened in stunned silence as I poured out everything. The financial drain, the gaslighting, the betrayal. When I finished, she took my hands in hers. "You will stay here as long as you need," she said firmly. "And tomorrow, we call Zara." Zara had been my friend since university. While I had pursued design, she had gone into private investigation, specializing in financial crimes. The thought of involving her made this nightmare suddenly very real, but I nodded. I needed answers more than comfort now. I barely slept that night, replaying every interaction with Alejandro, Carmela, and Priya in my mind, seeing the red flags I had willfully ignored. By morning, grief had hardened into resolve. When Zara arrived, coffee and laptop in hand, I was ready. "Tell me everything," she said, her professional demeanor softened by concern. Don't leave anything out, no matter how small or embarrassing it seems. For hours, I talked while Zara took notes, occasionally stopping me to ask for bank statements, dates, names. She worked with methodical precision, her expression growing increasingly grave. "I need access to your financial records," she said, finally. "And permission to run background checks on all three of them." "Do whatever you need to do," I replied, handing over my laptop. "I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with." What Zara uncovered over the next few days shattered any lingering doubts about what had happened. This wasn't a relationship gone wrong or a greedy future mother-in-law. This was a sophisticated, practiced con. "They've done this before," Zara explained, spreading files across my aunt's dining table. "3 times that I can trace. Alejandro targets wealthy, isolated women. Carmela plays the difficult mother-in-law, creating tension and financial drain. And Priya, or whoever their female accomplice is at the time, provides the exit strategy." She showed me photographs, newspaper clippings, court records. 3 women before me, all left heartbroken and significantly poorer. None had pursued legal action, either from shame or because the losses were hidden in legitimate-seeming expenses that would be difficult to prove as fraud. "The pattern is always the same," Zara continued. "They establish themselves in the victim's home, systematically, isolate her from friends and family, and begin siphoning money. When resources start to dwindle or suspicions arise, they engineer a dramatic exit that leaves the victim too emotionally devastated to pursue them legally." I stared at the photographs of the other women. A widow in her 50s, a divorced executive in her 40s, a young entrepreneur like myself. Different ages, backgrounds, but the same wounded look in their eyes. "They miscalculated with you," Zara said, squeezing my hand. "You left before they were ready, before they could set up their final play." "Which would have been what?" I asked, though I thought I already knew. "Based on their pattern, they would have escalated conflict until you either transferred the house to secure peace or they manufactured a reason to evict you, possibly with false abuse allegations. Then complete financial drain before a very public, humiliating breakup." The coldness of it made me shiver despite the warm day. "How do I stop them?" "That depends," Zara replied, her expression serious. "What outcome are you looking for?" I considered the question carefully. "I want my home back. I want my money back. And I want to make sure they can't do this to anyone else." Zara nodded, something like approval in her eyes. "Then we build a case. It won't be easy and it will take time, but I think we can do it." Over the next week, we meticulously documented everything. Bank statements showing the systematic withdrawals, credit card charges for items I had never seen or approved, text messages between Alejandro and Priya discussing plans to split the assets once the divorce is finalized, and keep her distracted until the house transfer. I changed the locks on my house but didn't return, instead staying with my aunt while we built our case. Predictably, the calls started almost immediately. First from Alejandro, his voice contrite and concerned. "Baby, where are you? We're all worried sick. Whatever you think you saw, it wasn't what it looked like." Then from Priya, tearful and apologetic. "It was a terrible mistake. I had too much to drink." And Alejandro was just comforting me about a breakup. "Please come home so we can explain." Finally, from Carmela, her tone alternating between syrupy concern and veiled threats. "Darling, this family misunderstanding has gone far enough. If you don't come home soon, people will start to talk. Think about Alejandro's reputation. Think about your future together." I saved every message, every voicemail, adding them to our growing evidence file. When my credit cards were declined at dinner with Zara, I wasn't even surprised. A quick check confirmed that Alejandro had reported them stolen and requested replacements sent to my house, where he would intercept them. "They're getting desperate," Zara observed as I called the bank to report the fraud. "Their cash flow just got cut off." The desperation became evident when they showed up at my aunt's doorstep unannounced. Alejandro in his most expensive suit, Carmela clutching a bouquet of my favorite flowers, Priya hanging back with a carefully crafted look of remorse. "Nisha, please," Alejandro began as soon as my aunt reluctantly let them into the living room. "This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. We love you. We're family." I sat across from them, acutely aware of how different I felt from the woman who had blindly trusted this man. "What exactly am I misunderstanding?" I asked calmly. "The scene with Priya was nothing," he insisted, reaching for my hand. I moved it away. "A momentary weakness that meant nothing, and Mother deeply regrets losing her temper. Don't throw away our future over one bad night." Carmela dabbed at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "I was under such stress with the party. You know I would never hurt you intentionally, darling. You're like a daughter to me." The performance was so practiced, so smooth, that if I hadn't seen the evidence of their previous cons, I might have wavered. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm. "What do you want?" I asked, cutting through their rehearsed apologies. Alejandro exchanged a quick glance with Carmela. "We want you to come home. We want our family back together." "On what terms?" Another glance between them. "What do you mean, terms? We're family. There are no terms." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes directly. "I need assurances, guarantees, that this kind of behavior won't continue." "Of course," he said quickly, too quickly. "Anything you need." "The house," I said, watching their expressions carefully. "You want me back? Sign the house over, completely. Sole ownership in my name." Hope and greed warred on their faces, and greed won. They probably thought it was a small price to pay to get their comfortable life back, imagining they could manipulate me later. "If that's what you need to feel secure," Alejandro said, his voice gentle but his eyes calculating, "we can arrange that." "Tomorrow," I insisted. "At my lawyer's office. Then we can discuss my return." As they left, promising to meet the next day, I caught Priya looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Worry? Guilt? Or just concern that their scheme was unraveling? "Are you sure about this?" my aunt asked when they had gone. "Letting them back into your life, even temporarily?" "I'm not," I assured her, a plan taking shape in my mind. "But they don't know that." That night, I called Detective Rivera, a contact Zara had introduced me to who specialized in confidence schemes. "I need to know if what I'm planning is legal," I began and outlined my approach. The detective listened carefully. "It's unorthodox," he admitted. "But if they sign willingly, without coercion, it's perfectly legal. The question is whether you're prepared for the aftermath." I thought about the other women whose lives had been disrupted by these predators, about my grandmother who had worked so hard to secure my future, about my own dignity, which I was finally reclaiming. "I'm more than prepared," I replied. "I'm looking forward to it." My lawyer's office was deliberately intimidating, all gleaming surfaces and austere furnishings. I arrived early, reviewing the documents one final time with Ms. Desai, a sharp-eyed woman who had immediately understood what I was trying to accomplish. "The property transfer agreement is straightforward," she explained, pointing to the key clauses. "Once signed and notarized, the house will be solely in your name. No liens, no claims, no joint ownership." "And they can't contest it later?" "Not successfully," she assured me. "We've included language acknowledging that they're signing of their own free will, without coercion. The notary will witness that they appeared to understand what they were signing." I nodded, smoothing my silk blouse, deliberately wearing an outfit Alejandro had once complimented. Today was about playing a role, one last time. They arrived precisely on time, Alejandro in a business suit, Carmela in designer clothes that I had undoubtedly paid for. No Priya this time, interestingly. "Nisha, darling," Carmela began, moving as if to embrace me. I stepped back slightly, maintaining professional distance. "Thank you for coming," I said coolly. "Shall we begin?" Ms. Desai led us into the conference room where the documents were laid out. I watched their faces as she explained the terms of the transfer. Alejandro maintained a mask of concerned affection, but I caught the quick flash of triumph in his eyes when she confirmed the house would be transferred solely into one name. "This seems extreme," he said, playing his part. "Surely we can work things out without legal documents. It's what I need to feel secure. Moving forward," I replied, the words rehearsed but delivered with just the right hint of vulnerability. "After everything that happened, I need concrete assurance that our home is truly ours." Carmela placed a hand over mine in a gesture meant to seem maternal. "Of course you do, dear. We understand completely." What they thought they understood was that I was offering an expensive olive branch, a gesture of reconciliation at my own expense. What they didn't understand was that I had no intention of reconciliation. The house transfer was just the first step in a much larger plan. Ms. Desai slid the documents across the table. "If you're ready, please sign where indicated." I held my breath as Carmela's pen hovered over the paper. For a moment, I thought she might balk, might sense the trap closing. Then she signed with a flourish, her signature as extravagant as her tastes. Alejandro followed suit, his signature more hesitant, but ultimately complete. The notary stepped forward, checking identification and witnessing the signatures. With each stamp and seal, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The property that my grandmother had made possible for me, the home I had lovingly created, was now legally and indisputably mine alone. "Congratulations," Ms. Desai said as she handed me the confirmed documents. "The transfer will be registered with the county by end of business today." Alejandro reached for my hand as we stood to leave. "So, when will you be coming home?" I slipped my hand from his, tucking the documents into my purse. "I have a few more things to take care of first. I'll be in touch." His smile faltered, slightly. "How long? Mother has been cooking your favorite dishes all week." "Soon," I promised vaguely. "There are still some issues I need to resolve." Outside in the parking lot, Carmela embraced me with artificial warmth. "We're so happy to put this ugliness behind us," she said, her eyes not matching her words. "Family should stick together." "Yes," I agreed. "Family should." I waited until they had driven away before pulling out my phone and sending a pre-written text to Alejandro with a file number and a short message. "This is what reconciliation looks like." The file number was for the divorce petition I had filed 3 days earlier, now being delivered to my house where Alejandro would receive it. By law, I couldn't file on grounds of fraud until we had been married longer, but I could file for irreconcilable differences, citing the physical and emotional abuse. My phone began ringing almost immediately. I silenced it, sliding into my car with a sense of calm purpose. Phase 1 complete. The house was mine. Now for the rest of my plan. I drove directly to my bank, where I had arranged a meeting with the fraud department. With Zara's help, I had documented every unauthorized transaction, every forged signature, every financial abuse of the past months. By the time I left, my accounts had new numbers, enhanced security protocols, and an investigation was underway into the fraudulent activities. Next stop was the police station, where Detective Rivera was waiting with the 2 previous victims we had managed to locate. Both women had initially been reluctant to come forward, ashamed of having been deceived, afraid of further harassment. But when I showed them the evidence Zara had compiled, something had shifted in their expressions. The same hardening of resolve I had felt myself. "You're doing the right thing," the older woman, Patricia, assured me as we waited to give our statements. "I've regretted my silence every day for 3 years." "They're counting on that silence," I replied, "on our embarrassment. our fear. Not anymore, said Elena, the younger victim, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. For hours, we detailed our experiences, providing bank records, photographs, communications that established a clear pattern of systematic fraud and emotional manipulation. Detective Rivera recorded everything, his expression growing increasingly grim. We have enough for charges, he confirmed when we finished. Fraud, conspiracy, possibly assault in your case given the witness to the slap. The DA will make the final call, but this is solid. As I left the station, my phone showed 17 missed calls, 29 text messages, all variations on threats and pleas. I deleted them without reading, focusing instead on my next steps. Back at my aunt's house, I found Zara waiting with news of her own. They're panicking, she reported, showing me surveillance photos of Alejandro and Carmela, frantically loading suitcases into their car. Looks like they're planning to run. Let them try, I said, suddenly exhausted but determined. The airports and borders have been flagged. Detective Rivera expedited the warrants based on flight risk. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks, perhaps months. No anxiety dreams, no waking in cold sweats wondering what new demand would greet me in the morning. Just peace, and the certainty that I was finally reclaiming my life. The arrest happened at dawn, officers arriving at my house with warrants for both Alejandro and Carmela. Priya managed to evade the initial sweep, but was picked up at the bus station 6 hours later, ticket to Mexico in hand. I watched the news coverage from my aunt's living room, strangely detached as their mugshots appeared on screen. They looked smaller somehow, less intimidating without their careful facades. Just ordinary criminals caught in an ordinary scheme. The reporter's voice was matter of fact. Police say the trio targeted wealthy women, establishing relationships before systematically draining their finances. At least 3 previous victims have come forward, and authorities believe there may be more. My name was not mentioned, a small mercy for which I was grateful. This was never about public vindication or revenge. It was about justice, protection, and reclaiming what was mine. When the news segment ended, my aunt muted the television. Are you ready to go home? I considered the question carefully. The house was legally mine now, free of their presence and their claims. But was I ready to reclaim the space they had tainted with their manipulation and betrayal? Not yet, I decided. There are still things I need to do first. The next day, I met with a realtor, not to sell the house, but to rent it temporarily while I traveled. The income would help fund my next project, a foundation to support victims of financial abuse, providing resources and legal aid that might have helped me recognize the red flags sooner. I also met with a therapist, acknowledging that recovery would be a process, not an event. The financial wounds could be addressed with paperwork and court orders, but the emotional damage would take longer to heal. As I packed for my trip, a documentary crew reached out, interested in featuring my story as part of a series on modern fraud schemes. Initially reluctant, I eventually agreed after speaking with Patricia and Elena, who both felt that visibility might help other potential victims. Just because we were deceived doesn't mean we were fools, Patricia had said firmly. It means we were trusting. There's no shame in that. There was wisdom in her words, a perspective I was slowly coming to embrace. Trusting others wasn't a weakness to be eliminated, but a strength to be protected, to be extended carefully to those who had earned it. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for when I would return from my travels. All 3 defendants remained in custody, denied bail due to flight risk. My testimony would be crucial, but for now, I had done all I could to ensure justice would be served. When the day of the preliminary hearing arrived, the courtroom was colder than I had expected, the wooden benches unyielding beneath me. I sat, with Zara on one side and Ms. Desai on the other, drawing strength from their presence as I prepared to face Alejandro, Carmela, and Priya for the first time since their arrests. "Remember, you're not on trial here," Ms. Desai whispered as the bailiff called the court to order. "Just tell the truth, exactly as it happened." The defendants entered in prison uniforms, a jarring contrast to the designer clothes and carefully cultivated appearances I was accustomed to seeing. Alejandro's usual confident swagger was reduced to a shuffling walk. Carmela's immaculate makeup was gone, revealing a face lined with age and bitterness. Priya kept her eyes down, refusing to look in my direction. Detective Rivera had prepared me for this moment, but nothing could fully ready me for the surge of emotions. Not hatred or anger, as I might have expected, but a profound sadness for the relationship that had never really existed. The future I had imagined with a man who had seen me only as a target. The proceedings moved with methodical precision. The prosecutor outlined the charges: fraud, conspiracy, assault, embezzlement. The evidence was presented in clinical detail, my private pain reduced to exhibits and testimonies. Bank statements showing systematic theft, text messages revealing their calculated manipulation, photographs of the bruise on my cheek from Carmela's slap. When my turn came to testify, I walked to the witness stand with my head high, swearing to tell the whole truth. For nearly 2 hours, I recounted everything, from the first day Carmela moved in to the final confrontation at the engagement party. I described the financial drain, the gaslighting, the isolation from friends and family, the physical and emotional abuse, the betrayal. Alejandro stared at me throughout, his expression unreadable. Once, when I described finding him with Priya, a flash of something like amusement crossed his face, quickly suppressed when his attorney touched his arm in warning. "Ms. Sharma," the prosecutor asked, "did you transfer ownership of your home to the defendants willingly?" "I did," I replied calmly. "But under false pretenses. They led me to believe it was a step toward reconciliation when in fact it was part of their plan to secure my assets." "And what made you suspect their intentions were not genuine?" I gestured to the evidence displays. The pattern was clear once I began looking for it. The same tactics used on previous victims. The text messages planning to split my assets after forcing me out. The systematic isolation and financial abuse. During cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to paint me as a jealous, unstable woman who had lashed out when finding my fiancé with another woman. But the evidence spoke for itself, especially when combined with the testimonies of Patricia and Elena, whose experiences so closely mirrored my own. By the time the judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, even Alejandro's mask of confidence had cracked. The judge denied bail for all 3 defendants, citing flight risk and the severity of the charges. As the bailiff led them away, Alejandro looked back at me, his expression finally revealing the rage that had always simmered beneath his charm. In that moment, I realized how close I had come to a life controlled by that rage, that manipulation, that cruelty. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, hungry for details of what the press had dubbed the Golden Cage scheme. I declined interviews, letting Detective Rivera handle the official statements while I slipped away with Zara and Ms. Desai. "The hard part is over," Zara assured me as we drove away. "The evidence is overwhelming. They'll likely seek a plea deal rather than face a full trial." She was right. 3 weeks later, facing mounting evidence and the prospect of a trial that would expose every detail of their scheme, all 3 defendants accepted plea agreements. Alejandro and Carmela received substantial prison sentences for their roles. As ringleaders, 8 years for him, 6 for her. Priya, deemed a lesser accomplice, received 3 years with possibility of earlier parole. The plea deal included full restitution to all identified victims, though we all knew the money was long gone, spent on their lavish lifestyle. More meaningful to me was the restraining order, ensuring they could never contact me again. The day the plea was finalized, I returned to my house for the first time in months. The rental agreement had ended, and the property management company had overseen a thorough cleaning. Still, ghosts lingered in every room, memories of manipulation and deceit. I moved slowly through the space, opening windows to let fresh air chase away the staleness. In the master bedroom, I found one of Carmela's scarves tucked behind the dresser, forgotten in their hasty packing. In Alejandro's closet, a receipt for a diamond bracelet I had never seen, presumably a gift for Priya. Rather than letting these discoveries reopen wounds, I gathered these remnants of my old life into a box, not to preserve, but to remind myself how far I had come, how much strength I had found in myself. That evening, I hosted a different kind of gathering, inviting those who had helped me reclaim my life. Zara and Detective Rivera, Ms. Desai, my Aunt Mira, Patricia and Elena, now friends rather than just fellow victims. Even the realtor who had handled the rental during my absence. We sat on my terrace overlooking the sea, sharing a meal I had prepared myself, drinking wine that I had selected. My home was truly mine again, filled with genuine laughter and honest conversation. I have something to share with all of you, I said, as we finished dessert. The foundation is officially established. We received nonprofit status last week. The Sharma Foundation for Financial Empowerment had been my focus during the legal proceedings, a way to transform my experience into something that might help others. With seed money from my own resources and grants we had secured, we would provide education about financial abuse, legal aid to victims, and resources for recovery. Patricia and Elena have agreed to join the board, I continued, smiling at the two women who had become such important parts of my healing journey. And we've already partnered with 3 domestic violence shelters to provide financial literacy workshops. To new beginnings, Zara proposed, raising her glass, and to hard-won wisdom, added Elena. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Detective Rivera paused at the door. There's one more thing you should know, he said quietly. When we processed Alejandro's belongings, we found this. He handed me a small velvet pouch. Inside was my grandmother's ruby ring, the real one. I had replaced it with a cubic zirconia, replica months ago, I explained, slipping the genuine article back onto my finger where it belonged. When I first began to suspect something was wrong. He smiled. You were already fighting back, even then. Even when you didn't fully realize it. After everyone had gone, I stood alone on my terrace, watching moonlight shimmer across the sea. The path forward wasn't entirely clear yet. The foundation would require dedication and hard work. The emotional scars would take time to fully heal. But for the first time in a long time, I felt genuine hope, genuine possibility. My phone chimed with a message from Ms. Desai. Final restitution order signed today. The first payments should arrive next month. The money didn't matter much anymore. My business was thriving again, my financial security restored. What mattered was that justice had been served, not just for me, but for all the women whose lives had been disrupted by these predators. I thought of Alejandro in his prison cell, Carmela without her luxuries, Priya facing the consequences of her choices. The golden cage they had tried to build around me had become their prison instead. 6 months after the sentencing, I hosted another dinner party. Not an engagement celebration or a reconciliation, but a housewarming for the home I had reclaimed and redesigned. Gone were all traces of Carmela's gaudy taste, replaced with pieces that reflected my heritage, my journey, my strength. Among the guests was Vikram, an architect I had met through the foundation work, whose quiet intelligence and genuine respect had gradually worn down the walls I had built around my heart. We were taking things slowly, both aware of the shadows, of my past, but refusing to let them dictate my future. As we gathered around the table I had set with my grandmother's china, I looked at the faces of those who had become my true family, bound not by obligation or manipulation, but by genuine care and mutual respect. Before we eat, I said, raising my glass, I want to thank you all, not just for standing by me through the darkest days, but for being here now, to celebrate the light. Vikram's hand found mine under the table, a gentle pressure that asked, nothing, demanded nothing, simply offered connection if I wanted it. And I did. Later, as guests mingled in the living room, Aunt Mira pulled me aside. Your grandmother would be so proud, she whispered. Not just of what you've built, but of who you've become. I touched the ruby ring, its familiar weight a reminder of the strength that ran in my blood, the resilience that had allowed me to break free and rebuild. I'm proud too, I replied, surprising myself with the truth of it. I had lost much in the past year, illusions shattered and trust betrayed. But I had gained something more valuable, an unshakable confidence in my own ability to survive, to thrive, and to transform pain into purpose. The house around us hummed with conversation and laughter, no longer a golden cage, but a sanctuary of my own making. And I was no longer prey but a protector, no longer a victim but a victor, reborn through fire into something stronger and wiser than before.